This is Inner Healing Paths podcast. Here we discuss the healing of the mind, body, soul, and spirit through a variety of different paths. We have emotional and spiritually minded conversations centering on ancestral healing, psychology, astrology, yoga, meditation, magic, and indigenous spiritual practices of the world. I am your host, Rosa Shetty, and I am so happy you are here. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Rosa, and this episode is with Dr. Hortencia Jimenez. She is a sociologist, an author, and a health coach. Her work and research as a sociologist primarily focuses on Latinx communities in the United States. Dr. Jimenez has several publications in leading journals in sociology and Latino studies. And for this conversation, Dr. Jimenez shares her own personal story of coming to the U.S. from Mexico as a child. She shares her healing journey and how she's been able to overcome very difficult experiences. She talks about her work on dismantling oppressive diet culture and how to help people heal their relationship with food and the body. And just know that this episode is not meant to treat or diagnose any physical or mental health condition. This episode does not substitute for healthcare or mental health services of any kind. Guests have a right to share their opinion and perspective, and this does not constitute an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Hortencia Jimenez. Take a listen. Welcome, Dr. Hortencia Jimenez, to the Inner Healing Paths podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Very excited to share this space with you and your audience. Gracias por la invitación.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Gracias a ti por aceptar, por aceptar la invitación and
Es
for
un honor.
joining.
No, thank you.
Oh,
thank you for
you.
seeing me, for seeing the work that I'm doing on social media, and of course the work that we always do in our communities that's offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think I always say there's not enough of us, doing the work, the healing work. And especially when we're talking about the Latinx, the Hispanic community, there's even less, right? Less people
Absolutely.
doing the healing work. So for those that are not familiar with you and what you do, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and the healing work you do?
Yes. I live in Monterey County, which is home to the Esselen Casanoan Nation. So I think it's so important to acknowledge the original inhabitants of these lands, the stewards of these lands. I am a full-time sociology professor. I teach in the community college. I'm a sociologist, so I teach a wide range of courses and a lot of intersecting topics. I am a first generation college graduate. I'm a Mexicana inmigrante, proud to be indigenous from Huichol ancestry. I was born in the Sierra Madre of the state of Nayarit, Mexico. And I have 4 sisters. I'm the second to the oldest. I came to this country when I was a child. When we're talking about healing and trauma, I think that's part of my experience and how we carry that in our bodies, and that informs, I guess, the work that we do. So I can say that I feel displaced. I was uprooted. I was taken away from my parents and my sisters. And so that is very traumatic. And I grew up here in this country, in the United States, raised by my paternal grandmother, who is going to be a 1-year anniversary in about a week that she passed away. So I was raised by my paternal grandmother and aunt. I was undocumented for a couple years of my childhood, which tremendously shaped my my lived experience as a child. who didn't have the language to articulate her life and her experience, and understanding why was she so far away from her family. Why was she here and not with her mom and father and sisters back in Mexico? And then trying to understand why she couldn't stay when she had her temporary green card, you know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a little bit about who I am. And you said like the work I do is informed by my lived experience, my
Mhm.
lens, how I see the world, and my academic training as a sociologist and also as a health coach.
Yeah, no,
And I'm a
that's
mother
great.
of three.
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
15, soon to be 16-year-old,
Oh,
14-year-old, y una
yeah.
de 11.
Yeah, wow. So yeah, so you're busy. You have a lot going on, and thank you for your
And I have a fur
open
baby.
and a for
My beautiful dog se llama Sol, German Shepherd.
Yes.
He's 4 years old. He's my emotional pet, so it's important.
Oh,
I want to acknowledge
yeah.
my dog has been through. He has been with me through a lot of grieving and a lot of healing.
Yeah, sometimes they're our most faithful, loyal companions right through it all. They just accept us no matter what. But
Yes,
thank you. I wanted to just acknowledge your story, and even though it was very brief, I
yes.
got the sense that so much of the passion that I see through through the your social media and through the work that you've done. I could see how it's almost like it's being amplified or fueled by what you went through as a child. And I'm just wondering if you're okay sharing with the listeners how a little bit more about how that experience of having
Mhm,
to come to the US and leave your family behind, how has that been, how have you been healing, or how has your healing journey been
mhm.
side to side with your sociology, career and academics?
Mhm.
How has your healing evolved as you
Yes.
started this journey as an academic, right?
Mhm,
As a
thank you.
professor. Yeah. How do
Yes.
you see this
Mhm.
journey for you?
Thank you for asking permission because I think, and this is for the community who is listening,
Mm,
when we are asked to be in podcasts and share, we are
mm,
always also very, I guess I'm always very intentional who I say yes to and how much to share. And your podcast is one that I respect, that I enjoy listening
oh,
to,
thank you.
and it's a gift when we share our experiences. It's a gift that we're sharing with others, even though there's a lot of trauma and a lot of pain. So I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that, and that it's still not easy to talk about our life experiences that have shaped us. But I'm in a better place in my life to be able to do so, and I will continue to share with people who I know can hold this gift and honor it. So gracias.
Thank you.
Um, as a child, I didn't have the language to understand what was happening in my life. And so, honestly, there wasn't any healing as a child or as a teenager. It wasn't until I guess I have to kind of pause and say that I was raised in a very traditional Catholic home and oppressive home. So if we talk about healing from a institutional lens as religion as an institution, that is, I want to recognize that the Catholic Church was my only avenue as a child and teenager. I was forced to go to church every Sunday. So that was part of my healing in that whatever capacity I had. It wasn't the best, but that's what I was able to have access to. And it wasn't until I got to the university that I took introduction to sociology and I fell in love. And that's the passion I transmit in my as a professor. And I think also on my everything I do, even on social media, you can see like I light up every time I talk about sociology. It changed my life. It changed my life because it gave me the language to understand my experience. Like, oh, understand the factors, understand that as a child, that it wasn't my fault, that I was separated from my family, that it was understanding systems of oppression. So I began that journey of that healing, so that the spiritual part, that like religious, was there, but then like the academic, education it can be a place of oppression, but it can also be liberating. So it was for me, it was liberating having the language to articulate my experience. Unfortunately, it wasn't really validated. I lacked representation from faculty of color, but just like the content that was being presented and what I was learning me ayudó mucho. And also being involved, I've always been involved in the community, so always being connected to the Latinx immigrant community. So if I want to talk about healing, then we also want to acknowledge that activism or civic engagement, como lo quiera nombrar, ¿verdad? That has also been part of my healing, and connecting, and always being grounded to my identity, and giving back to the community. So that is also healing. And then kind of, I would say it is, unfortunately, in 1998, my father passed away unexpectedly. I was going to go into my sophomore year of my undergraduate. And so this is a trigger warning for everyone. My father was killed. He was tortured in the most inhumane ways
Oh my
that you can
goodness.
imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
the only tool I had,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to turn 18.
Yeah.
I had to go to Mexico, and I had to see my father
Yeah.
en el ataúd.
Yeah.
So that was hard. And the only resources that I had, was the institution,
Mm-hmm.
religion. But I
Mm-hmm.
started getting involved with the missionaries,
Mm.
specifically Catholic missionaries, women who marry God technically, and it was
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. Actually, like, I immersed myself, and that gave me so
Mm.
much healing, because I was mad at God. I was like, how could you let this happen?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I had a very messy, complicated, nuanced relationship with
Mm-hmm.
God and religion. And I spiritually, I began that healing process. So I was between 18, I didn't meet the missionaries until like I was 21 or 22. So imagine that was a mess between 18. I was
Yeah.
traumatized. It was awful. Like, academically, it was really
Yeah.
hard. But that's a whole
Yeah.
different story. But in
Yeah,
terms of that
no,
healing, yeah.
it sounds like either you were navigating or trying to heal from the experiences of childhood, and then here you are starting college and being exposed to language that makes you that helps make sense of what happened to you, and then this terrible trauma occurs, and it's almost like you're
Yes.
getting started all over again and navigating and finding your
Yes.
ground and trying to figure things out, and you reconnected with spirituality, or it sounds like
It was still
it's
the way that,
religion.
yes, it was
Religion,
organized religion,
it was the
spirituality. Yes.
yeah, but
Because it's different now,
it
how I embody that, and my relationship with God has changed
yeah.
over the years as part of my own healing.
Mm,
So when I met the missionaries, like, I did a lot of like healing, like,
mm,
but that kind of the spiritual institutional, that's how I'm kind of like, and and this is not to offend anyone, but like,
yeah.
how can I best explain like my
Mm-hmm.
healing and my spirituality that was connected specifically to the institution of religion, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's all I knew. And anyone who's listening to this, if you're a student, please, and as a professor, I tell the first day of class, please look for the resources in campus. We have mental health, we have counselors. If I would have known, I never got the counseling. I never went to therapy. I started therapy probably less than a decade ago. And let me tell you, I
Mm-hmm.
haven't really processed my father's death and that
Mm-hmm.
grief. up until last year with my grandmother, because now I
Mm,
have the resources
yeah.
to be able to go to therapy and pay. So I'm actually
Mm,
still like, I still need to work through my father's death. It's way different. Like I've
yeah.
done so much podcasts about grief, and
Yeah.
when you lose someone because of suicide or they're killed, it's a whole
It's
different
different,
process of
right?
healing, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's on many levels, right? Emotionally, of course, as a
hmm
human being, spiritually, it's a
hmm
whole other healing process. And then but even though you didn't see it, but listening, knowing the story vicariously, you were traumatized through
hmm
that. Just
yeah,
knowing what happened to him is traumatizing.
yes,
So,
yes,
and then of course, this is your father. So this is it sounds like it's just a very layered trauma that you're
yeah,
navigating. And I think so many, going back to what you were sharing of how you went into this field, try to make sense of what you experienced. I think, as I come from the therapy background, and a lot of therapists do listen to this podcast as well. And I think that many can relate to that, because so many therapists, if not all, we go into this field because we are also, especially, I mean, for me, I started when I was very young. I was also trying to find the language to
hmm
and the resources, right, to help myself. And of course, it only makes sense. Well, if I went through this and I understand how it feels, like I'm going to be great at helping others. And in a way, yes, but it also is very triggering, right? Because then you
hmm
get to work with people that just remind you of your own experiences. So
hmm
it's
hmm
important to do your own healing work. But I
hmm
think that, like you said, academics sometimes is a doorway to that world
yes.
of healing and finding resources and recovering from what we went through.
Yeah, so when I went to grad school, I did my undergraduate and my master's at the same institution, San Jose State University. And when I went for my PhD, I was in UT Austin and Austin, Texas for 6 years. And that's decided that I wanted to be a student and a parent. I wanted to disrupt this idea that you can't have it all. You can't be, you're either just a student. And I'm like, like, cuando? This is why academia, So I didn't do any type of healing. And imagine going through being a brown woman pregnant and in grad school is so hard. That's another level of trauma that I had to go through. And trust me, it's still hard. But it wasn't until I would say the last maybe 10 years that I have been healing through like professional going to therapy, but also through connecting with my indigeneity and connecting with Mother Earth and my garden. That has been it's just been amazing. It's been healing, like even playing my drum and the food being in mi altar, all that is a it's a whole it's different. Now I don't go to church, I can't be in that space. And that is okay. So this is an invitation for other people who were raised um in a very traditional either Christian home, and it's okay. Like it's this journey of healing and your relationship with God, the creator, your ancestors is non-linear. There's no right or wrong way. And I'm speaking from my own experience. And so just wanted to say that, and like you have unconditional permission to connect to God at any point, like whenever it feels right, or if you don't like wrong, right? Oppression works.
Okay, sorry about that. There was a bit of a glitch there with our
Yeah.
internet, but
Bit of lag.
absolutely, I just want to comment on what you were sharing about the healing being nonlinear, and we hear that so much, right? And we see it now in social media, especially for folks that follow accounts related to healing. But it's not a concept that you can just cognitively say and then you're good, right? Next time you have a trigger, or it's one of those things that you experience. You experience the non-linear healing journey each and every time there's whether it's a trigger, a change. I always like to say, sometimes a good change, a new job, having a baby, sometimes things that are happy trigger inevitably parts of our past that need healing, or that need maybe another component of healing, right? Because there is, when we're doing the therapy, and when we're doing, connecting with our culture, and we're doing spiritual practices and all, and we're doing everything, right? And then inevitably something triggers us, and we're like, well, I'm doing all the things that I can do. Well, sometimes, because you're doing all the things, life gives you an opportunity to once again take a look at a part of the healing that's still there, right? Maybe it's just a small thing, but it needs your attention. And here we are again, going back to that. And I think I think it's beautiful that life, the good and the bad, sometimes gives us these never-ending opportunities to
Yeah,
continue
and
expanding.
exactly. And I think too, part of the toxic positivity in social media around just being positive and around healing is, from my perspective, as a sociologist, as a health coach, I say that healing is it's a journey. It's not a destination. It's not like climbing Everest. It's not like you reach the top and you're like, yeah, ya acabé, ya llegué, I'm good.
No, no,
No,
yeah.
it's because we're dynamic beings and we're interacting with people and we will be triggered. But we might have the tools and the
Mm-hmm.
strategies, right? But I feel like it's como like a scar que está allí. It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
trauma, it's those events happened, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they might not feel the same, but it might hurt and might take you to those memories. I mean, I'm obviously not a therapist, so you know more than me. I
Yeah,
don't
no,
want
that's
to.
exactly how it happens. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah, but
no.
speaking as a sociologist, like it's gonna end until we die.
Yeah, yeah. And I had a client that, just to give an example to what we're talking about, I had a client who had done so much work around growing up with an angry father, so much work for 10 years. Um and and then it wasn't until her father was close to dying that all of a sudden she started having flashbacks. I mean, it had been years, right? And they had a good relationship. They had been able to make amends, and they had a good relationship with a supportive, loving daughter. But the fact that he was now in hospice, all of that, it was not so much the grief, or the anticipatory grief that, this natural response to knowing that this is going to happen. For her, it was the flashbacks came back, the classic PTSD symptoms and nightmares, all that, and she was trying to make sense. Well, in navigating this, there was a part of her that was still hanging on to the idea that her father could be the father that the little one within her, her inner child, was still hoping for that, and that her father can maybe be what she needed. And of
Yes.
course, now that he was dying, that possibility, that would no longer be, right? So that, even though cognitively she knew what was going on, she did
Hmm.
not understand it emotionally. Even her body, her nervous system were
Right.
having a whole reaction. So sometimes that's how it
Yes.
works, right?
And
This is
how it
a little bit of an
manifests.
extreme example, but
Hmm.
sometimes there's parts of it, that of our trauma, that we may not even understand until we go through certain life
Yes.
stages, right? Like
Yes.
losing a parent, is a part of life, for
Yes.
many of us. And so it's just how it is. And from your experience, from a sociological perspective, how does, as a professor in sociology, how do you guys make sense of this
Hmm.
trauma, or the collective trauma,
Yes.
which is another layer that
Yes,
we go through?
absolutely. Yes, actually, I just recently did a keynote address for the Merced County Office of Education, and the topic was on adverse childhood experiences. And I opened the keynote with, like, traumas are a matter of fact, they're there. It's like how we process them, if we're able to and willing to go through that, so that we can heal, and so that we don't harm others. And my whole focus, and I also want to make sure that people know here that are listening, that the childhood experiences that we had growing up, they weren't our fault. Yeah, so going and hugging my inner niña right now and letting her know nothing was your fault. Not, I mean, I just share like a couple things with you, but there's so much other traumas that I have gone through that none of that was my fault. And once we understand that trauma is at the individual level, it is through family, through people around us at the micro level, at our like close knit, right? But that trauma is also manifested at the institutional level, right? So as a sociologist, it's always helpful when I tell my students it's a way also to liberate yourself and realize that these traumas that happen to you as a child, they're connected to society, they're connected to broader structures. So if you come from an abusive household, or when like my father, que en paz descanse, was very patriarchal, very machista, and I want to be as honest with you, and it wasn't until probably either a year and a half or two, I was meditating, I was in my altar, and I started crying, and I forgave my father. And I talked to him and I said, I forgive you. Like, patriarchy harmed you. Like, he enforced patriarchy, but patriarchy, so like having the language and being compassionate with my father at in my 40s, I couldn't have said that because I still had resentment because my father was violent. There was domestic violence, it was really bad. But coming to a place of compassion 20 years later. Okay, ya no sé si son 20 o 30. I lost count. I think 20, right? I lost my father. It feels like it was
Oh, it's
yesterday.
okay. Yeah.
But just telling you this is that's how I see trauma, and that it's not just at the individual level, it's societal. How do institutions, how do these ideologies of religion, what is the role, like even our government and the laws and policies that they pass that shape the family, right? They're all intricately connected. We cannot talk about healing while recognizing systems of oppression in our society that make it
Absolutely.
difficult for us to live and to thrive.
Right. And that causes trauma. And if you're already dealing, like you said, with that trauma at home, whether it's because of abuse in the house, or then all of these structures, then just it compounds, it just
Yes,
adds and adds.
absolutely. Yeah, and then you feel like powerless, but once we
Mm,
begin to identify them and challenge them, then that's where the hard and beautiful work is at the same time.
yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to shift gears a little bit because I know in your social media and your Instagram, you've talked a lot about diet culture and the toxicity within that, and specifically how it impacts the Latinx, communities. So can you talk a little bit more about diet culture and the intersectionality of that with trauma and our communities?
Yes, of course. I'm one of the few Latinas. There are other women of color, Latina dietitians, nutritionists doing this work. I am the only like sociologist. So I feel lonely in this journey. I do want to say that the work I'm doing
Mm,
is hard in terms of the content that I'm creating
yeah,
and the lens in which I'm putting it
yeah.
forward, and feeling lonely, not having a support system online. Now I'm creating that. So just for everyone to know that it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of vulnerability, a lot of for me it's faith, like through God, but also connection with my ancestors to do this work. So it's not like, oh, pues hay mucha gente. No, no, no hay. Y my voice gets muted a lot as well because it's not popular. And I started this account during the pandemic. I was doing a lot of work in the community, face to face. And with the pandemic, there's this whole transition to do stuff online. And I actually started my account like for like, oh, share recipes because I had time to cook and show recipes, maybe some exercise videos. And then slowly I started doing research as a good academic. I was like, let me check where are the other platforms, other accounts that are doing similar work. And that's when I realized, oh, there's a lack of representation. That kind of gave me even more motivation. So been a very hard journey. I've experienced a lot of different challenges, but I have really centered I really have centered it on my experience as a Mexicana, as an immigrant, as a Latina growing up in the United States. While I am not representing all Latinas or Latinx or Latine, that's not my intention. But my intention is, from a sociological lens, to provide people an understanding of diet culture beyond the mainstream white Eurocentric understanding, which is like diets, like eating healthy or detoxing or all this other stuff. And I'm building on the work by queer folks, by people of color, in understanding diet culture. So if you're asking me as a woman of color, as a Latina, diet culture for me is not just the wellness industry. For me, diet culture is a system. It's a system of oppression that is rooted in all the interconnectedness of all these institutions. That's where my lens comes from, a social and racial justice lens. We cannot talk about healing our relationship with our bodies if we don't talk about our relationship with food and vice versa. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you know, or if you go through my feed, you're like, why is she talking about oppression? And y eso no tiene nada que ver con la comida y el cuerpo. It has everything to do. And I think that's what people have been challenged, and I'm getting more exposure. People are like, oh, this is a different way to see diet culture, and it is very unique, and because it's coming from my experience and it's coming from a sociologist. So if we center dismantling diet culture, by centering on these systems of oppression, we can talk about why we have, bad image days, or we have body image challenges, why we have food trauma. Yeah, that's connected to the family, and didn't we talk about earlier how that's connected to society? That is my hope. There's a lot of nuances. Sometimes I do good, sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what the heck I'm saying. I mean, I know what I'm saying, but like, do people see it? Do they understand what I'm saying? Like, because I get it. So that's
Yeah,
kind of
no.
where I'm coming from.
And what about, how do you see the body shaming, that process, that, how do, as a community, or, as a group, how do we get conditioned for the body
Yes.
shaming? How do you see
Yes.
that play out? I'm
Hmm.
talking about, how do, kids at a very young
Yes.
age know,
Hmm.
or are able to criticize others, bully others based on their body? Or how do
Yes.
they know, well, maybe I don't measure up, I'm not
Hmm.
good enough?
Yes.
How
This
does that conditioning
mhm.
happen?
This happens at the moment of birth, even before. So even before a child is born, think about the reveal. ¿Cómo se llaman? Reveal parties, reveal celebrations. ¿Cómo se llaman?
Gender reveal
Gender
parties, yeah.
reveals. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a sociologist. There's so much to unpack.
Yeah.
You're already conditioning,
Mhm.
so the binaries, right, of is it
Mhm.
going to be a boy or a girl, right? And then the anticipation, que si va a ser niño o niña, y ya que sabes, you begin like buying what society says is what's according to that, right? So you're already boxing this baby that is in the womb, todavía no nace, you don't even know what their gender expression, gender identity, their sexuality is going to be like, right? So body shaming begins at home. Begins at home. The institution of the family plays a huge role. It is central. We learn these messages from our family. We learn it from our friends. We learn it from the community. And then when we are exposed to the media, that's another institution, right? So the media, television, the cartoons. I protected my kids as much as I could. They didn't watch, I'm so proud, and we talk, they didn't watch any Disney movies growing up. I was very intentional that they weren't going to be exposed to the white, thin body, to all these toxic narratives that, like, you need to be saved by a male, and they thank me now. They're like, I'm mama, but I was able to protect them as much as I could because they were going to be exposed to this, but I was going to give them the language and the tools. But, I come from a place of privilege of being educated and being able to protect my kids from these messages. But kids who are not, you internalize that. It's like you when you're a child, it's like we're a sponge. We soak everything around us. You go to the store, all we see are Barbies, all like the binaries of what children should play with. And that Barbie that is thin, ya te están diciendo what body type you need to attain the ideal version. And then at home, family will shame you, not only in terms of the size of your body, but the colorism, the anti-blackness and the
Yeah,
anti-indigeneity in our
absolutely.
families. Que tú eres más guapa o guapo or guape. If you're light skin, if you have blue
Mm-hmm.
eyes, if you're dark
Mm-hmm.
skin, marry someone who's lighter, so that in that internalized oppression, like all that is connected to the
Yeah.
body. And by default, it's gonna shape how you view your body, how you treat it, and like what you eat. Está conectado todo.
No, absolutely. Everything you said, I feel that, just in my own personal experience and journey and, growing up, that the body shaming, listening to my mom talk about her body, right? Or listening to the tias talk about how they look or how, or list or hearing how they criticize others, that these are the messages that kids absorb, I absorbed, right?
Yes.
So at a very young age, I knew how I wanted to look,
Mm-hmm.
growing up. And I remember having these thoughts in, I think maybe it must have been first, maybe second grade. I remember very clearly um being at school and looking at thinness,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're thin, they're not thin. And I remember even having a little conversation with my little friends and talking about body size. I mean, we were
Yes.
in second grade,
Yes. It
and
becomes so normalized.
it
That's
is,
the
and you
problem.
don't even know,
Mhm,
right? As kids,
mhm.
you don't even, you just talk, but it's all, we're, like you said, we're a
Yes.
sponge.
And
Kids
it's
are a
and
sponge. We're
mhm.
absorbing everything as children.
Because it's so normalized within our homes that we take it as real, as truth, and we don't question that. And then like the media, we see this in the media, even though there's a lot more diversity now and there's women in bigger bodies and there's that activism, but still there's still a lot of discrimination. And then in the school system and then the government, you see like all these institutions reinforce these ideologies. But I do want to say that, like, okay, how can we unpack this? Like, what do we do? Well, of course, support the work that I do on social media, learn, like, I provide, tips. But what I want to offer right now is the unlearning. We have to do that unlearning. We need to begin to question, because how you feel about your body and the ideas that you have about your body, they're a mixture of different people, of different voices. So it's the first step is acknowledging that they're there and being compassionate. That's the hardest part, the self-compassion, but saying, okay, this is not me. This is the voice of my abuelita or my aunt or my mom or la tia or whoever,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
right? That is so powerful once we begin to name where these thoughts, these oppressive
Mm,
narratives that we're carrying come from. So that's my invitation for people who are listening.
mm,
How you feel about your body, the self-hate, todo lo que tú piensas y sientes acerca de tu cuerpo, empieza a identificar cuáles son las personas que te causaron daño. Be compassionate with yourself and with those people, because other stuff is going to come out. Once we begin
mm,
that journey, if people want to, because it's difficult, that's where that part of that healing will come. It's not easy. But then I can't ask you go and be a disruptor, go challenge fat phobia when you yourself are you're not there. You
mm-hmm.
in order for us to be allies on other social issues in our society, we need to do some of our own healing so that we don't perpetuate harm. So that's one of simple it's a simple strategy to say, but it's very difficult.
No, thank you. I think that was going to be, my next question: how we can start challenging these beliefs when we identify these beliefs within ourselves, and how to navigate that. So, thank you for sharing that. Do you have any books or any recommendations on? I know you have a podcast as well, but anything that you recommend, education wise? Because I know I'm big on reading and education really helps me to make sense of what I'm going through. So for the folks that are like me and want to read and learn more, do you have any recommendations?
Yes, I do. One of the books that I really like, most of the books that I purchase and that
Hmm.
I read from are from people of marginalized identities, Black folks, queer folks, people in larger bodies. One of the most popular ones is The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love by Sonia Renette Taylor. It's
Mm.
such an
Oh,
amazing
I love
book.
that. Yeah, I have that
It's,
one. It's
yeah,
amazing. And it's so
yes, it
quick. It's a
is.
quick read, and it just
Yes.
I think after I read that book, it fundamentally changed my understanding of radical self-compassion because I had an understanding of what I read in other books, but reading her perspective on that just changed everything for me. So highly recommend that as well. Thank you for bringing that book up.
Yes. I was looking over my bookshelf right now and I can't see it with me here, but her name is Virgie Tovar, and I can send you that information on a
What
message.
is her first name?
Virgie Tovar,
Okay.
Virgie Tovar.
Uh-huh.
She has a couple books, and my apologies that I don't remember the
Oh, no.
titles of her book. She's a Latina fat activist and
Okay.
leading figure in gender and fat studies, and she talks about her experience growing up Mexican American as a brown woman in a bigger body. So, my invitation is learn from people who don't look like you, who are not in the same body as you, who are from different identities. That's all we need to do is learn and listen, right? These are some good books. Belly of the Beast: The Politics of Anti-Fatness and Anti-Blackness by Deshaun Harrison is a little academic, but it's such a great book as well. It talks really about what it means to live and be in a black body and a queer body, and the racial hierarchy, in terms of race, but also in terms of bodies, what bodies are deemed worthy and acceptable. um, Another book that talks about like basically the history of anti-blackness is Dr. Sabrina Strings. She's a sociologist, and Fearing the Black Body is also a sociological, more academic book. But for those who are interested in learning more about the origins of anti-blackness and the intersections with fat phobia, it's an amazing book. So those are just some of the few that I can make reference. Health at Every
Yeah.
Size. There's other books as well, pero
What
The
was that
Body's
one?
Not
The
an
last one?
Apology.
What was the
The
last one?
the belly.
Health in every
Oh,
size?
Health at Every Size.
Oh, health at every size. Okay.
Hmm.
I'm gonna write it down and share it with the folks in the show notes. You'll be able to see this
Yeah, and
list.
I can send you that information.
Well, well, thank you for that. And for the folks that would love to get to know more about you and the work that you do, can you share with us how people can find you?
Yes, I am on Instagram and TikTok with the same handle at Dr. Hortencia Jimenez, DrHortenciaJimenez. And I have my website, www.hortenciajimenez.com. That's all I have for right now. And I did recently launch my podcast. The title is Dismantling Diet Culture, Fuck Being Calladita. And I was very
I love that
intentional.
title.
Yes, because
Love
part of
it.
diet culture, if we
Yeah.
understand it as a systems
Hmm.
of oppression, is to silence us, to mute our voices. And I'm like, well, what a better title, fuck being calladita. And that means talking about everything.
Yeah, no, I love it. And now that we're talking about this just popped in my head and have you seen the documentary? It's an old documentary called Misrepresentation.
Yes. Yes, I've
Okay.
used it in it's a documentary.
It's
Yes,
a
and it goes by
documentary.
different decades. Yes, I use it in my courses. Hmm.
Okay. I watched that when I was in college. I think I was like 20 in my early 20s maybe. It again, it's one of those things that when you see it, it changes the way you see yourself as well. This is particularly about women, right? It's how you see yourself as a woman in this society, but it talks about the diet
Yes.
industry. It talks about the body shame. So it's
Yes.
wonderful. So for the folks listening, check it out. I think it's
Mhm.
on YouTube now. It's free,
Yes,
available on
yes.
YouTube.
And
So
how
check it
we're
out.
impacted by diet culture and systems of oppression have a lot to do with our the different identities that we have. And this is an invitation for everyone to acknowledge your privileged identities. And I will go first as an example, being able to speak English. I have an accent, but my accent is not that thick. So that also is, markers of difference and what is more, how you're treated because of that. So those are privileges I have. I have privileges based on my education, based on my social class, based on my immigration status, being a naturalized US citizen. I am tall and I am thin, and I am cisgender. So it's important to name the privileges that we have, not only just to name them, to recognize them and how they operate, and to be very mindful in how we interact with other people, to check our own, implicit biases as well. Just as I mentioned my privileged identities, I also have marginalized identities. I am a queer woman. I am indigenous. I am an immigrant. So, although those marginalized identities limit me in certain ways, it's important to recognize that, I have privileged ones, and I need to be super mindful on how they can manifest themselves in the community. We can't get caught up on like, oh, we're a minoritized group, más esto. We experience the world differently because of our privilege and marginalized identities. Some have more privilege, some have less, but it's important to recognize both and how they operate in systems of oppression and marginalization that ultimately lead to inequality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you were mentioning that, I was realizing sometimes, like you said, we get caught up in what we don't have, or the what we are, the struggles that we have because we're, I'm speaking for myself because I'm a brown woman, and but it's also important, and I would say even, equally important to also be aware of the privilege that I have inherently, right? Just, and like you said, I'll go ahead and I'll save mine because you were talking. But yeah, I was born here. That's a huge privilege. I speak English. I have education. I'm cis, a cisgender woman, and sometimes just being able to list that right now is like, wow, okay, so I have my own biases also, right? And
Mhm.
it's I because of the privilege of these privileges that I mentioned. So
Yeah.
I think it is so important to examine our own privilege, and also what can come out of that, and how are we perpetuating
Mhm.
these systems of oppression from
Mhm.
the privilege that we do have, whether it's a little
Yes.
bit of privilege or a lot, but
Mhm.
I think it's just important to be aware of it.
And connecting in to to close off the podcast in terms, how is this connected to healing? It has everything to do, because we hear in the wellness world that healing is expensive, that healing is supposed, yeah, I don't mind, yes, I would like to get a massage. Yeah, yeah, often, but I can't
Hmm.
afford it. So when you think about healing, it also comes with privilege, right? And from communities of color with less resources, healing looks differently. Healing for me has also been connecting with my garden, like spending time outdoors, taking my dog on a walk, cycling, going on long distance bike rides has been healing for me. Things that don't require financial resources, but then again, privilege, because some of these require time, right? So even then, when we show up and talk about healing, we also have to be super mindful, like this is coming from a place of
Absolutely.
privilege of what we're able to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom and this just all the information you shared. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much
Of
for having me. It was a
course.
pleasure.
Of course. Thank you. I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope that you found it healing and nourishing to your mind and soul. If there's a friend that you think would benefit from listening to this information, please share it. Share about our podcast. If you feel called to, please leave us a review, as this really, really helps boost our presence here in Apple Podcasts, and it makes it easier for others to find us. To stay up to date on new episode releases and special events and projects that I'm working on, you can follow us on Instagram at Inner Healing Paths Podcast. And you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website, which is rosachetylcsw.com. And I will include this information and links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing with you again next time.